All right, good evening and welcome, residents of Wakefield, to the annual review of the town of Wakefield's financial picture. With us tonight, Steve Mayo, town administrator. We have Doug Lyons, school superintendent. We have Dan Sherman, finance committee member, as well as the forecasting chair. And we have Frank Leone, who is the chairperson of the capital planning group. So we've got a slide deck we're going to go through. As we look at the slide deck, it'll give you an overview and a picture of where the financial situation is for the town of Wakefield at this point and going into the Springtown meeting. So Dan Sherman's going to open the slide deck and review some items, and the rest of the body will chime in as appropriate. Dan, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jim. Next slide, please. So our agenda, we're going to cover the past, talk about receipts, what are our accounts and our spending. We're going to do a section on the present. This would be the fiscal year in 22. And then we're also going to have a few slides on the future. Next slide, please. So on our receipts, we have various sources of funds available for us to spend on services and personnel for the town of Wakefield. And what this graph shows is the increase in those receipts over time. So it starts in 2000 at roughly $48 million up to 2020. And we've gotten up at that point, we're about 97 million. And you can see that the bulk of the receipts is tax levy, basically our property taxes. We get a significant chunk of state aid. We get local receipts, and we have an other category of other revenue that comes in. But you'll notice across the bottom that over the last 10 years, it's been averaging about 4.44%, and our 5-year average is 4.46%. So it's quite a bit stronger than the 2.5 from Prop 2.5, that percentage plus new growth, and it's the new growth that's really been pushing our revenue numbers upwards from year to year. Next slide, please. So on receipts, one of the things we like to look at is how much of the receipts coming in as a proportion of our total receipts. And one of the things that we started doing a number of years ago is try to figure out a way to have more reliable sources of revenue. And one of the things you'll see is the state aid line, which is the purple line. For a number of years, it's been moving between 20% and 15% of our total budget. And at that point in 2003 and 2004, it dropped significantly. It continued to drop. And this really made things difficult for those of us that remember the times when we had to cut services. 2009, 2010, we had to cut. The 2002 .com bus is where this graph started going down. And we realized what we really need to do is get reliable income that we can count on for our spending. And the state aid figures became unreliable. And you'll see that the tax levy line, which is at the top of the graph, where it was roughly in the upper 60s for many, many years, is now up in the 78% range. And that means that we can count on about 78% of our revenue and being pretty steady. So it's made our budgeting going forward much more straightforward, not as chaotic as some communities. There are communities out there like the Fall Rivers, the Haverhills, that more than 50% of the revenue is based on state aid. And when the state cuts, say 10% out of your 50%, that's extremely painful. So we've got to the point now where cuts of state aid are not nearly as painful, and that's a good place to be.
If I can jump in also on this slide, I think also another item that you can see the green line, which is our local receipts, and the purple line state aid, basically the same. And local receipts, you think of the local option meals tax, the hotel tax, and building permit fees, things like that, excise tax fees for cars. That's really evened off a little bit. It's been a consistent 10+%, some years around 10%. But that's really kind of made up some of the slack, I think, from the state aid. It's continued to grow, and it's something that we look at. And this last year, under the COVID pandemic, the biggest loss we had in local receipts was restaurants. Because people weren't going out to the restaurants, although that wasn't as bad as we thought. The meals tax, people did a lot of takeout in Wakefield, but the hotel tax plummeted. No one's staying in hotels. We have 2 hotels in town, so we look at that number too. But you can see that in the back 2000, there was a big 20% in state aid, 10% in local. Local has stayed pretty stable, so something that we look at too in the forecasting committee.
Yep. Next slide. So speaking of local receipts, here's what we've got for the past 21 years. And the main driver for our local receipts is the motor vehicle excise tax. That's the bottom bar. And you can see that it's been nicely growing for many, many years through 2019, and then a big drop in fiscal year 20, again, directly related to COVID. And our fiscal year ends June 30. So the expectation is that the motor vehicle excise tax is still going to be lower than fiscal year 19. It'll probably come up, be above 20 because there's a pent-up demand. It may not reach fiscal year 19, but we do expect an increase on motor vehicle excise. The other item that's has a significant drop is other excise taxes that went down. Our permits and licenses, that's actually went up a little bit. But you can see the total dropped from just about 8.2, 8.3 million in fiscal year 19 to about 7.6 million in fiscal year 20. For fiscal year 21, we're expecting that to come in around 7 million or so. And then for 22, we expect a little bit of a rebound to get back up to maybe 7.5 or 7.6 million, something like that. But I don't think we're going to reach the fiscal year 19 figure until perhaps fiscal year 23. We'll see. We've been wrong in the past in these forecasts, and I expect to be wrong again. But hopefully not by much. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about again about state aid. And you can see that, back in 1990, it was about, 6.8 million, and it increased quite nicely all the way up until 2001, 2002. We had a dot-com bust, and it plummeted some more in 2009, 10, continued to go down, and it's slowly been recovering. But you'll note that it's still in fiscal year 2020 is not as high as it was back in 2001. We just haven't had that kind of recovery from state aid. Someday I think we'll get above 2001, but boy, it sure has been taking a long time. And in terms of inflation adjusted dollars, we got a long ways to go before we get back to 2001. Next slide, please. So those are revenue sources. We also have various reserves. And this graph shows our stabilization fund. The stabilization fund is basically our rainy day fund. We can use this at town meeting with a 2/3 vote. We've used it in the past for different purchases, for example, at the head of the lake. And we've purchased other properties, and that's why you see the big drop from roughly 5 million down to 1 million in 2006. And then we've slowly been building it back up. So the purple dashed line shows your balance, and the balance legend is on the left, and we're about $3.7 million on our stabilization fund. But we also want to keep track of that stabilization fund as a percentage of our total budget, because the finance committee, the town council, Mr. Mayo, we all have a policy that says we want to keep our reserves at total of roughly 10% of our budget. And this is one of the reserves, the stabilization. So that's coming in at just about 3.7% of our total budget, which is that solid line. So we've got that as a fallback position, again, our rainy day fund. Next slide, please. Another of our rainy day funds is free cash. And free cash is basically the town's checking account. How much money do we have at the local banks that we can draw on for any particular reason by a majority vote of town meeting? And here we're showing in terms of the dashed purple line, again, is our balance. And the legend on the left shows that it was sitting around $2 million for many years, from 2000 until 2011. And at that point, we finally were able to get some new growth that helped us out. We moved to the GIC on healthcare. That helped us out. And we'll see a graph on that here in a minute. And so we started building up our free cash to where it needs to be. And as a percentage, which is the legend on the right, we're just over 6%. So if you think about the previous slide at just over 3.7% plus 6% and change, we're at the 10% level, which is where we want to be and where we'd like to stay. Now, this is a July 1 figure. And the note at the very bottom, you'll see that at the fall town meeting in November of 2020, we actually spent $409,000 out of free cash. So what's available today is actually less than $6 million. But in discussions with Kevin Gill, our town accountant, he thinks that between now and June 30th, we'll recover much of that $409,000 and maybe some more. So we expect the free cash to get back up into the 6.5% range. That's our target. Next slide, please. Another of our reserves is the debt service fund. The debt service fund is used for purchasing of large capital items or paying for large projects. We use the debt service fund for rehabbing the public safety building. We use it for the Woodville School. We use it for the recreation bonds. We just passed last year. We are using it for the road bonds, and we'll talk a little bit more about the roads later. But this debt service fund allows us to have a smooth approach to funding large capital projects. And so we have a fixed amount of money that goes into the fund each year, but we have variable amounts coming out based on the bonds that we've issued as a town. Some of the bonds have expired, the recent ones. We've got one expiring in 22. So those ins and outs are really steady going in, but a little more variable going out. So that is a fund that has dropped down to a small amount. At some point, we'd like to build it back up, but right now we have so many capital needs that it's hard to build that fund balance at any size.
And I will say, if we keep funding that account at the steady amount over the next few years, we are going to see that debt service fund increase a little bit for cushion for other years. So that is going according to schedule. I think that's been for a long time, that's been in effect, and it really, like Dan said, helped us do a lot of projects. So.
Yeah, it helps the projects, and it also really helps with the whole budget process where we don't have large swings of expense into the debt service fund. The volatility is handled by the fund.
Right. And I think that is something, we talk about the free cash number, we talk about the stabilization number, we talk about the budgeting, we talk about the debt service program and account. It's something that, the rating agencies on Wall Street look at when they look at the town of Wakefield and say, how are we financially? They look at all those together, and we have been able to maintain a AAA bond rating for the last, number of years. And that saves us money on interest, which is great on all these projects.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Next slide, please. So this capital slide, it's a little bit complex. I'll kind of walk through it. But capital spending is critical in terms of maintaining our buildings, providing police cruisers, the DPW, construction equipment and their trucks and all the stuff that's, large capital efforts. So one of the things we try to keep track of and try to improve on, and we finally started improving back in 2000, is how much money we spend on capital projects. And so the top line, the dark blue line, is the total capital spend between our annual budget and capital plus our bonds. So if we do, say, the road bond is in here, though that monthly payment or annual payment, and what we do on the road bonds is part of that top line. So those things are included. So you'll see that in terms of total, what we're spending is probably about $5.5 million. And as a percentage of our budget, it's about 5.6% of our budget is spent on capital. For many years, it was way, way too low, like 2 or 3% at best. And the evidence of that lack of spending was clear. We had a lot of projects that were being neglected, roofs that needed to be fixed, a number of things that were falling in disrepair. But since about 2000, we've really stopped kicking that can down the street and really improved it. If you look at just the capital spending that we have each year, and we'll have the discussion on those projects, that's the purple line. And for many years, that was extremely low. We've gotten it up to around $2 million. 2021, you'll see a dip next year when we do this little show. It'll dip down to $1 million, but we're going to be back up to 2 million. And as a percentage of our budget, it comes in at just over 2%. So, and these percentages and this amount of spending is what we need to do. And actually, we need to do more than this, because we'll talk a little bit later about some projects that are out there that need attention, that have much, much bigger price tags than what you see here. Next slide, please. Another thing we like to look at is some of the large budgets and what they've been doing. Our healthcare, that was the one I mentioned earlier, how we moved to GIC and dropped substantially. You can see how steep that curve had been all the way up in 2012. We switched to the GIC. It dropped. It would have dropped much more, but at the footnote at the bottom there shows we put in about $1.7 million into a post-retirement medical trust fund. So you could knock off that figure all the way down to almost $8 million just on the savings at GIC. But now we've got this post-retirement healthcare trust. It has been growing substantially. The money is invested with the state. We have, I think, is around $18 million in that fund now. And our funded ratio has increased substantially to the point that I think one of the reasons that we have the AAA rating was because of the OPEB trust and the amount of money we were putting in there starting in 2012. So that's been a real nice plus. The other thing that's important about that top line is the steepness. From 2000 up to 2012, our healthcare costs were increasing very, very rapidly. We're 10, 12% increases per year was not uncommon during that period. But since then, over say for the last 10 years, the increase in healthcare has only been 2.1% a year, which is absolutely outstanding. That's a great spot to be in. Many other communities and corporations would love to be able to keep their annual healthcare costs down at 2.1% per year. A real positive. The other purple line is retirement. That's been going up a little more rapidly. It's going up about 6% a year for the last 10 years. So now we're somewhere we're almost $6 million will be coming up in 2023 and 2024. And finally, the Northeast VOC, that's been a pretty steady increase, and we can handle a 3.1% increase per year. But I think this year in 2022, you'll see that the numbers jumping up quite a bit more. And one of the drivers of the Northeast Regional VOC is the number of students that opt out of Wakefield Public Schools and decide to go to the VOC. And when that happens, we get a bit of an increase in the charges, and that hurts us a bit. So we're encouraging our students to stay with the Wakefield Public Schools, but we understand, if there's something offered that they want at the Voc, they're gonna grab it. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the history of personal services budget, and personal services is basically the salaries that are spent for the employees of each of the various departments. And you can see I keep a running 5-year average of where the money is being spent at the schools through fiscal year 21. It's roughly 5%, 4.4 for fire, libraries, low point 2.8. DPW, we've been quite a bit more money is being spent on DPW. We've hired a number of people to try to maintain our buildings and grounds. We put a little extra effort there. Human services 4.5. And of course, as Steve will quickly point out, the winner for keeping the costs down, general government at 1.5% over the last 5 years.
I don't know how Kevin does that, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Thank God for Kevin.
Yeah. So at total, we're at roughly we've been running about 4.8% per year over the last 5 years.
And I got to say, a lot of that is, some addition of some personnel, for in mission-specific positions, particularly in the police, fire department as well. And the schools, certainly Doug can talk to that when he goes to his budget. But we are adding people for services, and in the human services, increasing nursing and mental health, recovery coaches, things like that, something that are really necessary in society today. So it's not just, same people, it's addition of mission specific.
Right. Yeah. And maybe one of the things, just thinking out loud, I may want to do is just look at the number of personnel in each of these departments. And so people don't think that, for example, the DPW folks are getting 5.6% increases in their pay every year. We're adding people. So it's more than just salary.
Yep. Very
Next
good.
slide. So on our budgets in total, so this is personnel plus expenses, contracts, everything all thrown in together. So over the last 5 years through fiscal year 21, you can see the schools come in about 4.6, fire at 4.3, library, again, holding the line 2.2, police is 4.4, DPW, again, we're spending quite a bit more on DPW, so that's at 6.7. And again, once again, Stevens general government 2.8, and then total comes in at roughly at 4.6% is what we've been our annual increase in spending each year. So that's a look at our past. That's what we have for income, our expenses, and our reserves. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim at this point to talk a little bit about fiscal year 22.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And like you highlighted and Steve highlighted, the AAA bond rating comes from many different components, and it's a team effort across the board with department heads and schools and town council. So it's a great story. So appreciate that. So when you look at budget priorities for the coming fiscal year, you see buildings, so forth, education, public health, playgrounds, certainly infrastructure and safety. It's been a challenging year as described on the receipt side, and then obviously a challenging year for everyone. So as we look into the fiscal year 22, look at the next slide. As Dan mentioned, when you look at the reserves leading into 22, we're right around that 10% level, which is acceptable, which is an excellent place to be. We have curtailed some services due to COVID-19, and on the finance side, you might think there's some small savings to that, but in the end, there's been offsets with costs. Capital projects total about $50 million over the next 5 years. So, theoretically, if we were looking to cover those capital projects for a 5-year cycle, you're talking about $10 million capital projects per year. So those get evaluated and prioritized, and Frank will talk about that. And then the meals and hotel tax, again, we're below normal. 1 million in FY20 and 21. Steve's mentioned it. We expect a rebound as the world slowly seems to be moving forward, and many people are getting vaccinated, et cetera. So we think we'll see that come back. We're encouraged to believe that that'll come back. So I guess on the good news, snow and ice overdraft for FY22, I didn't run the snow blower very much, so we did not have a significant need for any overdraft. So that's
We still have a couple of months left, so don't jinx it.
yeah. I'm looking out. It's raining, not snowing today. That's good. And then obviously the COVID-19 implications. We are concerned, about that and the overall financial impact in the coming years as well, obviously from a human perspective, but also on the finance side. Next slide. The outstanding debt and interest payments, we have about 63 million between all active completed projects that we have to payments towards. Other projects we're looking at, the town is looking at schools and other buildings. So that's a big area, an important area, but a necessary area to appropriately allocate and fund. The unfunded liability on the retirement side, $42 million as of 1/1/20. And so that's a big number. So wow, that's unfunded liability. But as Dan would express, we're in a compared to other municipals, let's just say in the state, we're in a very, very good position. Dan, is that how you would describe that for the unfunded portion?
Yeah, that 42 million, we're about 67 or 68% funded. So we're above average
Right.
in terms of retirement. There are some systems that are nearly 100%, but there's a lot of them that are like 40%, 45. So, and we will be fully funded. And I think the current schedule is 2035. We'll reach full funded status. But this past year has been very good in terms of the return on the assets.
Right.
2020 was probably around 14% return. So, that's going to take a big chunk out of that 42 million. So hopefully we can continue to have a good market.
Great. So outstanding obligations, you're looking at about $172 million. And again, that's over the entire portfolio that we describe here. So.
Dan and Jim, if I can jump in, Dan, on the OPEB unfunded liability, 66.5 million, which I think is much lower today, probably around the $40 million range. What would that be had we not, in general sense, had we not set up the OPEB trust? And how does that compare us to other people?
You would just add $18 million to the 66, so we'd be up around $84 million as our unfunded liability, and the percentage would be like 0.
Right.
But with 18 million against a total liability of 84, we're like 23 or 24, 25% funded, and that's way above 99% of the rest of the communities out there. There's very few that are that well funded at this early stage of the game. So, and that's one of the reasons I think that we've got that AAA rating, as I mentioned, is the fact that we've got, our funded ratio is as high as roughly 20%.
Yeah, I agree, because I'm on those surveillance calls with with Wall Street, and one thing they also like about that is that money that we put in every year, that 1.6 million or so, is embedded in the budget, and we chose that together, to put that in the health insurance budget every year. It wasn't an afterthought. It's in there every year. It's something that we could look at in a horrible time, and but we haven't had to do that, and that's something that's paid real dividends for us. And we probably make up, half of that on lower interest rates for the taxpayer. So it's a pretty cool story.
Right.
We get very excited about OPEB.
No. It was a very prudent decision a number of years ago, and you're seeing the dividends, and well done. So, next slide. So on the revenue side, again, for FY22, tax levy increase, 4.4 million, get it to about 81.8 million. which it also includes 2.5 million in new growth. There's been a substantial amount of growth in the town. There's also a utility electric line that's bringing in some growth as well. That's not in the sense of new construction, if you would, new buildings.
Yeah. We
Yep.
won't know new growth until August, September, August. That's
Yeah, this is
always a forecasted item, and the problem with new growth is timing, right? We know it's going to come. It might be the next fiscal year, so let's hope that we come in close to that. That's a big part of our, and it should.
Absolutely. And again, you see state aid increase from the state offices. We did get an increase 261. Local receipts, we see that increasing to the 7.28, and again, that's an estimate as well, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yep. And then obviously, free cash as needed, which we will be looking to use some as we close in on this budget cycle. The light department, Wakefield Municipal Light Department, payment in lieu of taxes, $900,000. Available funds, 84, and then debt exclusion for the Galvin. So the total revenue picture is in the 101 million. So, and we need all of that. So next slide, please. When you look at the expenses, so we had again, the revenues, and now you look at the expenses when you look at this budget. And you can go down the list, and the total is, 93.1 in these budgets will be talked about and gone over at town meeting. But again, public safety, 2.9, the public works, looking at the significant budgets, the school department, and then benefits. And I'd ask Doug Lyons, if he wouldn't mind, just touching a little bit on the school side of their budget, looking into FY22.
Sure, Jim. Thank you very much. The budget for the FY22 school year will be $45.3 million. This is a good budget for us and a good opportunity for us. It reinstates some positions that we were unable to fund this past year due to some cuts that we've needed to make. We also were able to create some offsets for this coming year, to put aside some money for COVID as well. And so I think that this budget is conservative, even though it makes up a very large part of the total budget. But I think that it's collaborative and conservative and helping us get started. I think one of the things that we're going to be focusing on as we open school, we're planning on being able to open in a full schedule in September. And when we do that and we welcome students back, we're anticipating that we're going to be able to run transportation like we have in the past and be able to stand up our before and after programs. And so I don't know what that was. I think, I don't know if that was an alert on another computer, but so we're going to be looking when we welcome students back in the fall and when we work with students over the summer, we're going to be looking very closely at learning loss and what students need to get back to school, right? So we've had students in hybrid schedules, we've had students in remote schedules, and we need to kind of acclimate students and get them back into schedules, but also support them, support their special education needs, support their social emotional learning and counseling needs, as well as really trying to plan thoughtfully over probably a 12 to 36 month period about tiered supports and intervention services that students might need to kind of get back on track and to stay on track as we get back at it here in September. That's a very quick snapshot of what our priorities will be. We're also collaborating more closely now than we ever have with Steve and his team. And we're looking at facilities. We're pleased to have completed the Greenwood roof, and we're progressing and meeting all of our milestones for MSBA and the high school project as well. So that's a very quick snapshot, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Very good, Doug. Thank you. And it's been quite a challenge for the school system this year. We appreciate it. It's just, it goes without saying, challenging year. Thank you. Next slide, please. Some other items, on the capital side, there's a $2 million funding for that. The debt services, as we talked about, for refuge, for trash, etc., and overlay and state and county costs. So there's another 9.3 million of expenses there associated with things that we use, a need to run the town. And again, it goes against how we're trying to budget and the money we're going to use for the year. The next slide is a slide that highlights the next slide highlights some of the expected increases in revenue. So again, you see a revenue increase of about 4.6. The spending side, current increases in the spending, you see those there between salaries, retirements, etc. Increase in other line items, the capital, Frank is going to talk about that in a minute. So the capital was cut last year due to COVID and due to financial constraints. Excuse me. And we're happy that that's back to the $2 million mark. On the department budgets increasing 2.2 million, or over 3%. The school budget, police, etc. Everybody, in the 3.7 to 4% range. The library, a low increase. They do a great job at the library. It's an asset for the town, and on a budgetary basis, they do well with the money they have, and so that's a great story as well. So that's some of the highlights on the the revenue side and the budget sides and the increases you're going to see.
Jim, if I may, on a little bit on the library, because the library was closed for much of the year, they had some attrition, reduced staff, and when they went through their whole budget process, because they were closed or have been closed for the past 12, 13 months, they figured out ways that they can do things a little more cheaply, and that's why they're at below 1.1%.
Very good. Next slide. And this slide is over capital, and I'll ask Frank to kind of review the capital highlights, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, this year capital, we're right below the $2 million mark. Over the last 5 years, we've hovered right above it to try and meet all the needs. We usually start with anywhere from $6, $7, $8 million in requests, and our committee tries to make the best decisions to get everybody what they need and what's most urgent at the time, including some additional things for the recreational and stuff like that. We were happy to get back to the 2 million this year. Last year with the COVID, we were asked to cut it in half, and we're hopeful with some future funding, maybe we can get that $1 million back, because this year, even though we were a little below, we know they took it easy on the requests, and I'm sure we're going to get those requests back next year and then some. But just an overview looking here on the slide. The prior leases, 176,000. That's for high dollar items, maybe a truck or a crane that costs a couple $100,000, and rather than taking, a good portion of our budget up, we can spread that out over 5 years and minimize that payment. But over the last 10 years, that the prior leases, we've been able to manage that number down from, I think at the beginning when I started was almost $1 million, and then it was usually hovered around 500,000. But now we're getting that number down to right there, because it still makes sense to do that with the large dollar items. The fleet, mainly for the DPW trucks, we try to do 3 police cruises a year, and then whatever the fire department may need. That'll always be 3 police cruises in there as long as we can do it. And then the DPW fleet actually over the last 10 years has been pretty updated, and we're hoping that'll be good for our forecast in the future, when the director will be able to foresee when those trucks will be expiring and not have to use a 30-year-old vehicle anymore. Facilities and repairs in the buildings, close to $500,000. The roads, fields in the parks, one of the highlight items on this. We've been trying to get a new playground in every year. We started that a couple of years ago for the schools. You know, the most recent one was the Greenwood. In this year's budget, it's going to be the Woodville School. And then hopefully in a couple of years, all the schools, all the playgrounds will be very new, relatively new within, you know, the last 10 years once they're all done. The miscellaneous items all across the town, which could be anything from the library to the fire department, little items that just add up. The IT is down to, it's been going down because the school has been taking most of that into their budget, which has been great because there have been times when Chromebooks were introduced to the school system, or we had to expand the Wi-Fi access where, you know, Capital took a good chunk of that from them. But the schools have been doing a great job of taking most of that. But when there's a high item that comes in, most of this IT is for projectors, to update the projectors in one of the buildings. So the total number, you can see it right there, 1,982,300. And then the water and sewer, they're pretty stable numbers that are that don't seem to that don't increase if we take care of their needs if need be. That's it. Quick summary there. Thank you.
Very good, Frank. Appreciate it. And again, we're all encouraged to get back to the close to 2 million with the capital. It's just one of those things. If we don't stay on top of it, we start to slide. And last year is one of those cases, as you said. We're hoping to continue to chip away and get back on the footing that we lost last year due to the situation in COVID. So appreciate that. Next slide, please. So the summary for looking forward for FY22 in the Springtown meeting we have coming up. The budget expenditures for 21 were 98 million. The proposed budget expenditures for 22 are at 102.3 million, which is an increase of a little over 4 million or 4.1%. Revenue results projections to be 101 million. So that's a little lower than the 102 million for the expected proposed expenditures. So there's a difference of about 1.1 or 1.2 million that we've earmarked to be covered by free cash. And again, Finance Committee and the Town Council and all involved, we understand this. We believe it's a prudent thing to do right now, given what we've gone through. And that's how the budget will be presented at town meeting. Obviously, it's a balanced budget as it needs to be, and that'll be covered by the free cash. As Dan mentioned earlier, that will be going down a little bit, but we'll be looking to slowly work that back to where we need it to be. Next slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Dan. Dan's going to review some challenges and some future-looking items. So, Dan.
Thank you, Jim. So looking forward, trying to figure out, where our needs will be and what kind of issues are in front of us. COVID-19 is still out there. It's still going to be an issue for us, and maybe a large cost issue, maybe not. We'll see what kind of aid we get from the feds and from the state to help us there. We still need some work done on our buildings. Field maintenance still needs to be worked on. Several of our buildings could use some energy cost controlling efforts applied in terms of building improvement. Our roads and sidewalks and playgrounds still need work. The good news is we did pass this road bond a year ago, and I expect that this summer we'll see some of that effort, some of that money really get devoted into an effort to fix some of our roads. And we don't have the DPW director on this particular session, but maybe Steve knows, so which roads is Joe gonna be working on this summer? Do you have any idea?
I think if you follow where the gas work and the utility work is being done, the worst thing for a road is is a utility cut. And I know that Frank knows a lot about this too. So if you look at what's been done on Vernon Street, in that area, they're putting in the new gas main. If you look in some of the roads around there, Brewster Road, Forester Road, if you look at the work done on Salem Street and Montrose Ave for the National Grid project, Broadway, when those are done, you're going to see a lot of roads being paved. Albion Street will also be paved in the next year, the upper end, we're doing all the work there. So, there's much more synergy now, I think, than ever before between the utility company, MLD, and the DPW. We're trying to make sure we have everything in the ground done before we pave it. And I know it's taxing on the whole community. I know it's kind of, it's rough because everywhere you go, things are kind of patched and banged up. But I think within 2 years or within a year plus, when all these are paved, the complaints we'll be getting is that people are driving too fast because these roads are going to be all nice and smooth. We're working on Lowell Street now with gas work. So Frank might know a little bit. He's out there too. But utility cuts are the worst things, right, Frank?
Yeah. If they don't do the patches correctly in the roads, it's a nightmare when they start sinking and settling, and then it's not a speed bump, it's a speed hole.
Right.
So you get all the utilities done, then you pave it, and I mean, you said it's going to be a raceway, but we might we'd have to get more speed boards out there.
All right, thank you. So stormwater is still a challenge. We need to keep working on that. The public safety building, something that was passed this past year, that's going to be a major effort, and that's going to put a little pressure on a debt service fund. The Wakefield High School, it's moving forward, working with the MSBA, and that is going to be a major challenge. It's also going to be a major challenge when we go to town-wide vote on a debt service override like we did with the Galvin. That's a current plan on the high school. And we also have over $43 million of projects that the capital and DPW groups have put together in terms of things that are out there that need some attention. So from fiscal year 23 to 26, I mean, the 4 years, you're talking spending, roughly $10.11 million basically per year. If you really wanted to address all of that, a lot of stuff, of course, is going to be deferred and pushed out, but that is a challenge for us to make sure that we don't get too far behind on capital. Next slide. So opportunities on the good news side, we've already talked about the new utility line coming in, and the increase of roughly $1.5 million is expected for fiscal year 22 as part of a new growth. That will help immensely. And going forward, of course, the 1.5 million, basically stays there each year. That'll go up. So it's embedded in the formula, if you will. We got the last public safety bond payment, $600,000 is in fiscal year 22 to replace by a new public safety bond payment, in 24, I would guess.
24, yeah.
Yeah, 24, we'll have a new bond. Not sure exactly what that number is going to look like yet. And then we also have some funds that we expect some portion to come in based on the COVID-19 cost efforts. Excuse me. American Rescue Plan and potential increase in state aid.
On the American Rescue Plan, if I can jump in, this is a little bit different than the CARES Act, which was passed previously, which were for direct. CARES Act was really, think of it as direct COVID expenses. So whether we spend money on plexiglass petitions or extra remote teachers or nurses or extra covering overtime for police and firefighters because people were out, sick with COVID, which we had a number of that. So the American Rescue Plan Act, it looks at things a little bit differently, and this will be a great opportunity. And I imagine our forecasting committee on the finance committee town council, school committee will really have to talk about this, because American Rescue Plan Act money can be used to replace revenue shortfalls, which we did experience. It can be used for business, helping the business community, can be used for infrastructure, and used for COVID-related expenses. So under that act, Wakefield is slated to receive close to $8 million. So that's something that we're really gonna have to think about. How do we prudently spend it? How do we prudently make sure we utilize it? And we have till 2024 to utilize the funds. Utilize it in a sustainable way. So one thing that we've talked about at the Finance Committee for years is not to use non-recurring revenue or recurring expenses. So I think this is exciting, and there's certainly some positions at the school department for next year as we transition out of COVID. That might be one-year positions that we've talked about. There may be some positions there are some positions in some of the other departments we're looking at. But going forward, this is a lot of very exciting, and will be challenging for all of us to think about it. So it's not that we can throw a big party, it's that we have things we need to do. As far as state aid is concerned, I was a bit disappointed in our increase in Chapter 70 funding this year, which was only $150,000. I thought it should have been double that, at least. The state has listened to us, and the state is creating a Chapter 70 Stabilization Fund. So if we see children returning to the public schools, which I think we will, a lot of kids maybe went to private school because they were full-time, we may see a little bit more money coming in. And I'm sure that Doug and the school committee can find great use for that. So let's hope that happens.
Thank you. And Steve, it should be noted, right, the American Rescue Plan money is really not embedded in our budget. It's sort of, when it comes in, it'll be appropriated and dealt with accordingly, right?
A very little bit of it, we've probably looked
Right.
at, of that 8,400,000 or so, that were directly COVID-related expenses. Remote teachers, for instance, more hours for nursing, things like that. So we were very prudent with that, and which means that we were able to kind of take care of ourselves with what we needed, and there may be some opportunities in the future with that money.
Yep, the Finance Committee likes hearing that. Thank you.
We want to make you happy.
Very good, thank you. Next slide, please. So we also have a little summary here in terms of the COVID-19. We did have the state aid was not as harsh on us in terms of what we expected. So that cut was a little bit of help. Our local receipts reduction was pretty close to what we expected a year ago at this time when we had the same session before town meeting. We knew there was going to be a significant cut to local receipts. We had a pretty good idea where that might land, and actually we came in pretty close. And also, as Steve just talked about, federal state aid is going to cover a large portion of our cost to cover the virus and related costs. Next slide, please. So I think this is my final slide. And this is a forecast. People have seen this in the past, where we look at a summation of the expenditures and income. And obviously this is all built on assumptions, lots of assumptions regarding department increases in cost, healthcare, the capital, the income side, what's going to happen with local receipts and new growth, and so forth. So this is my best shot in the dark of what's going to happen down the road. And you'll notice that, for example, this year we're going to be pulling roughly $1.2 million from free cash to cover the shortcome between expenditures and income. We're also going to have a shortfall in 23, 24, 25, and 26. And when we get out there to 26, our free cash is going to be somewhere down to around $1 million, $1.5 million, something in that neighborhood. And as a percentage of the total budget, it's going to be down really, really low. And as we started out at the beginning of this session, right now we're about 6.5% of the total budget is free cash. By the time we get down to 2026, it's going to be like less than 1%. And we'll have a reserve still a stabilization. We might be, instead of 10%, in the 3 or 4% neighborhood in terms of total reserves, and much less in our policy. So right now, the forecast doesn't look good for the next 4 years. Things finally turn around after that. We start getting some increases. Our income starts exceeding our expenses for enough years and starts to build up to the point where we expect to have back into a surplus position. And by 2030, 2035, in that neighborhood, we'll be back up to the 10% neighborhood. I'm a little concerned about getting as low as we now expect in 2026, 2027. I'm a lot concerned, not to mince words. But right now, our path is one where we will fall out of policy, and which means that if our income doesn't meet up our expectations, it'll be even worse. If we exceed expectations, these numbers aren't going to be quite so dire. But for the coming years, we really need to be very careful about our expenditures. We need to hold the line on our budget costs, because you see in the far right hand, cost increases are roughly around just a little bit less than 4%, and income is just barely above 4%, except for 2022. We're spending, I'm sorry, our income is quite a bit higher than our expense, but again, we have to spend $1.2 million out of free cash to cover the shortfall. So the trends are not looking so good for the next few years, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. And I will say, I'm always been an optimist, and these numbers are probably optimistic. So, but they're not great. Anyway, I believe that's the end of all the slides. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Very good, thank you. And anybody on the panel have any other final closing comments?
The only thing I would say is that, one of the things I'll say is that while Dan and I spent a lot of time talking about these numbers that he showed on the last slide, I do think that we're going to find at the end of this year that there will be money returned by a lot of departments, including snow and ice. A little bit in snow and ice will come back, which will make our free cash numbers look a little bit better, and we will see probably a little bit more income than we planned for. I see that, although we have to keep a great eye on that and make sure, I can see that will be a little bit better off in our reserves going forward, and we'll look forward and seeing where we are at the end of each year, Dan.
Yep,
Right.
Exactly. We'll see who's buying dinner the next time.
Buying dinner, exactly.
Yeah, and like you say, go ahead, Steve, finish, sorry.
The department heads do a great job of returning money to the town. They are really very careful. And I do think that the federal funds, there are some opportunities there, and you talk about those deficits of, particularly the first couple of years of a couple of $1 million. That's probably an area that we should look at replenishing loss of income and some of the expenditures to kind of, make up for that shortfall while we get, better in the next few years. So those are some great discussions we'll have, over the summer and over the fall. And I think the important thing is, as Jim said in opening, is that, school department, town hall, town council, school committee, and finance committee, capital planning committee, all work together to make sure that this all, that we spend every dollar wisely and forecast it for the future. So it really is a great group.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. And yeah, in closing, I was just going to really reiterate the same thing, that it's a collaborative effort, and many hours go into it. A lot of hardworking people, a lot of hardworking volunteers, and the town, using the free cash as we described, we feel it's the right thing to do at this time. And as Steve described, there's a lot of moving parts that could come that should come along and help with that. And we feel what we're bringing to town meeting is a prudent budget with appropriate spending and prioritizing as much as we can. It's always prioritizing all of the requests and trying to meet as many as we can within the reasonable constraints that we put upon the town and the finances. So with that, I would say thank you to all on the call. And for those that have questions, I'm sure those will be forwarded through Wakefield Cable Access, through to Steve, and we'll be happy to get back to you with any questions. And that would conclude tonight's session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Thanks.
See you the 8th.
The 8th.
May 8th.